And just fair warning that note you're getting on your screen shows we are recording today's session so we can share it with folks afterwards.
Thank you.
You bet. I always feel like we need on hold music for start of these meetings.
When we hold classes, I get to greet everybody when they come in and things like that, and do the water cooler type of talk because we don't get to do that in person much anymore.
Yep. I know it's rare when we have in-person meetings. It's fun to see people.
Yes, it's like three-dimensional people.
Morning, everyone. We'll give it another minute just to get a couple more people in the door and then we'll get started. Morning, Treasurer.
Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Oh, can't complain. Tends not to do any good anyway, so.
All right, we can probably get started. Tony, are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I'm ready.
All right. Well, good morning and thank you for joining us, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the one that sent out the meeting invite. My name is Chris Henning and I'm the Deputy Director for Communications here at Arapahoe County. I'd like to welcome you this morning for this special presentation on Prop HH and its implications for Arapahoe County municipalities and special districts. We did cast a pretty wide net with this invitation, so we know that there is a wide knowledge base. Some of you are going to know a lot, some of you are going to know very little, like myself. So we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do that by raising your hand in Teams. That's at the very top. Raise your hand. Or if you want to drop in a question in the chat, we can have one of our panelists answer those either within the chat or through the presentation. And we'll have some time at the end for some more Q&A. As a reminder, we are recording this session this morning and we'll send it out to everyone afterwards so you can reference it later. Do like to start off with some introductions, and first I'd like to welcome Assessor PK Kaiser to the meeting. He's been a little busy lately the last few months. I wonder why. And Assessor, I'm wondering if you can give us a brief background on why we're here this morning and what we should be looking for. And you are on mute, PK.
Sure.
There we go.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this special section. As we know that in this cycle, the property values are extraordinarily high, and it concerns everyone, the taxpayers and the taxing entities. We are so far facing the property owners, taxpayers directly, and by November 15th, we will conclude all the CBOE appeals. And then the technical part and most difficult part will start, which is to produce the certification and levies and tax rolls. So we are here together to know what we don't know, and we can share what we know so far. So preposition HH, what it brings, and if not, what we're supposed to do if HH is not there and if HH is there. Thank you, Arapahoe County, for helping us out, and thank you, DPT. And to add more confusion to the part, I will hand over to Treasurer Michael Westenberg.
Thank you, PK. As you said, I'm Mike Westenberg, the treasurer of Arapahoe County. Yeah, HH is weird, right? We at least know that. The problem with HH is, and we'll hear more about this in a second too, in all of our presentations and such. So forgive us if we don't go into details here for a minute, but just give you a little overview. HH is odd because it affects everybody different, right? Tabor does the exact same thing, but we've been dealing with that for years, and what we've created is kind of a hodgepodge of what affects who, right? Are you debruced? Are you not? Things like that. The cool part about it, if HH passes, it shouldn't actually affect us as the county that much, which is actually even crappier, but it's because our Tabor limits are actually more restrictive anyway. So we're going through a lot of this rigmarole just to kind of figure it out, and hopefully in a couple of years it will apply to us. So bear with us. We're going to try and be as much of a resource as we can, but know that, it applies to everyone absolutely differently. So sadly, you kind of got to figure it out for yourself a little bit, but we'll give you all the info we can. So stick with us, and we appreciate showing up.
Thank you, Treasurer, and thank you, Assessor. We also have on the call with us our dream team, and to fill in the appropriate details as we go along. Joining us, we have a Deputy Assessor for Appraisals, Michael Williams. We have Deputy Assessor for Administration, Rhonda King. From the Treasurer's Office, we have Chief Deputy Kim Williams, and we also have Finance Director Todd Weaver. Now, you may know one or more of these folks through your regular dealings with us. They will be on hand, as I said, to answer some questions and fill in any details. But to guide us through all this Prop HH and all the things that it has to offer us, we do have with us Tony Workman, who's the Property Tax Specialist with the Colorado Department of Property Taxation. He's been talking with folks across the state about this measure, and we are so glad that he was able to free up his schedule to be here with us this morning and walk us through it. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my name is Tony Workman. I work for the Division of Property Tax. We're a division in DOLA. And one of my main responsibilities is legislation. And so this year, the last couple of years, it's been very exciting legislation. And we analyze all the bills as they come across for fiscal note analysis, like all the assessors in the state do, and many other entities, as well as then what are the ramifications from a property tax point of view. And so I've been presenting this since July, I think, or June, this information. So hopefully I can answer many of your questions. This is is a broader audience than what I have spoken to in the past. So if you have a question that I have to think about, just let me pause and we'll think through your issues. I've received many questions from school districts and fire districts throughout the state already. So hopefully I'll try to answer many of those questions that you have. And if I haven't answered your question, then we will get to it. And let me share my screen. So now I should be. Chris, do you see the agenda there?
Yep, sure do.
Perfect. And again, as Chris mentioned, just raise your hand and Chris will be monitoring it for me, and we'll stop me in between slides as we're going through it, because we don't want to wait to the end to answer all your questions, because there's a lot of information here. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to start off with what's happening for this year immediately. Some of it has actually already happened. The early reporting, the The treasurer and the assessor have already provided their early reporting spreadsheets to the Division of Property Tax. And we've actually already sent it to Department of Revenue as well as the Legislative Council Services staff for their information. So we've already forwarded this on, and DOR uses this for looking at Tabor numbers. And while it's early reporting and it's not set in stone, that's the best information they have. After the 2023 changes, then we're going to talk about what's going to happen going forward in terms of reporting, backfill, revenue limitations. There are going to be some new classifications that are coming up in 24 and 25. And then I've got a couple charts for all the assessment rate changes that are going to be happening through 2032. Okay. Also, when I'm talking about the bill, if I talk about HH or Senate Bill 23303, I equate those two because HH is part of Senate Bill 23303. And that's why there are some changes that are in law today. So the changes for this year, the September 15th early reporting, which has already happened, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then the calendar changes, which will be very important for everyone to understand. Because we're used to our normal calendar when entities have to have their mill levy set, and those will change if HH passes. So by the early reporting information, every county will need to provide the division the following information, and you've already done this. Number one is the total property tax revenue reduction estimate for 2023. And these it's done in two parts, if HH passes or if it doesn't pass. So if it doesn't pass, the adjustments from Senate Bill 238, which happened last year, and so that is already in law. And then the combination of the adjustments made from 238 as well as this year's 303. And then we also need to know the increase in assessed value estimate from 2022. And so in order to gather all this information, the division put together a spreadsheet to assist the counties to provide us this information. And every county took the spreadsheet and created filled it out for each local government that were in their that's in their county. And so you guys had many spreadsheets to fill out. And so here's the sample spreadsheet that the blank spreadsheet that we sent out to all the counties. And I've been told that for all the local governments that have asked, that Arapahoe has sent out this spreadsheet, this early reporting spreadsheet to you. And if you haven't got it, I'm sure they would be happy to send it to you. But I wanted to go through this step by step in order so that if you've already received this spreadsheet, that you understand what the information is. All right. So the first item here is the 2022 assessed value for real property. And this is for real property only. It excludes personal property. And I've been asked that question many times, why are we excluding personal property? Well, that's how Senate Bill 23303 is written. All the differences when we're looking at an assessed value change from 22 to 23, we're only looking at the real property. The personal property was excluded specifically in the bill. It just calls out real property. And then the second question I get is, here's a modified mill levy from 2022. So what does it mean to be a modified mill levy? This is the mill levy that was used in 2022, but that you subtract off the mills that were allocated for bonds and contractual obligations. All right. And again, that is bill specific. People have asked me why it is that way. Oops, did I hit something? Anyway, I think I zoomed accidentally. I don't know what I did. We just created this spreadsheet to do with it what the bill said. Chris, can you still see that? It accidentally zoomed on me. I don't know how to undo it.
We can see most of it, but not the whole spreadsheet.
All right, I'm sorry. All right, I'm just have to do it this way for this slide. I'm not going to mess around with it because we want to get to people's questions. So that's the modified mill levy. It excludes contractual obligations and bonds. And this is all based on the 2022 mill levy. So it's not this year's mill levy. This year's mill levy hasn't been set, obviously. All right. Come on. Oops. Did I stop sharing accidentally? I'm sorry.
Yep.
I hit something and then it went wacko. All right. We'll get back to it. I'm not used to Teams, so I apologize.
For some reason, it's not everyone's favorite.
Just a quick question in the chat. Who should we email if we'd like a copy of the spreadsheet?
Rapo, PK, you're on mute.
Whoever wants to volunteer for that.
Assessor at Arapahoe.
You can also email myself. It's rking3@arapahoegov.com, and I'll get you one out.
All right, so now
Rhonda, can you also post that in the chat, please? Thank you.
All right, so we're back to the presentation. Is that correct?
Yep, we can see you.
All right, I'll try not to accidentally swing my arm around and hit a keyboard somewhere. All right, the column E is all the actual values. And these are the actual values for 2023, for this year's actual values that the assessor and his staff filled out. And you'll notice that we extracted personal property. Again, it's because of the peculiarity and how the bill was written, that some things include personal property and like the reimbursement, but the change in assessed value does not include personal property. So we had to have all the assessors exclude personal property from like commercial. Commercial has a lot of personal property. So that commercial value that's up on the line with on column E next to commercial, that's only going to be real property. And all the commercial personal property, along with all the other personal property, are going to be down in those two bottom rows 16 and 17. Oil and gas and mining, nothing changed in those. So we just had the assessor's office staff put in the assessed value as long as with the exclusion of personal property, and the personal property went back to the actual values. Okay. And here are the revenue, the actual value reductions for residential, and we broke them up into two pieces for residential because in 22 they had different assessment rates. Residential and then multifamily residential had two different assessment rates in 2022. And that's the accumulation. Here is where every residential property got up to $15,000 actual value reduction as long as it did not fall below the $1,000 assessed value. And likewise for multifamily. Commercial assessed value changes went in these columns, and those are for at $30,000 of an actual value reduction before the assessment rate was applied. The 30,000 is same. Another thing I should note for you is that I've got a section for 238 and a section then to the right is for 303. The 303 section, the changes are the assessment rates are changing from 230 from this year that's in place, as well as 303 made assessment rate changes, and we're going to talk about that. They also had changes in the assessed value reduction for residential property. For residential property, 303 has a $50,000 reduction. Okay. And again, 303 and HH is part of 303, and that's why I talk about 303. I just don't want to make sure I keep that clear for everybody, as clear as possible. Okay, and then here in this section, these came, the numbers came off of your certification from 22 and 23. We take the gross and the net values of right off of your 22 and your 2023 certification. 23 certification is preliminary, obviously. Went out August 25th, but you're still doing CBOE protest, and so the numbers aren't finalized. But this is so we can get the proper percentage for all the entities that have a TIF in their jurisdiction, okay? Because we take the taking the net divided by the gross will give you the proper percentage for the base. And then I added this screen because the first screen that I did was, you know, the assessors, the staff, and the treasurers, they all had to fill all that information out. Now that that information is filled out, in these green boxes is the information that we reported to the Department of Revenue as well as to LCS. And these are the numbers that will assist you, all local governments, when you're looking at budgeting for this coming year, because there's going to be more or less, you're going to have to put together, or you don't have to, but we advise, I'm sure DLG is advising that local governments look at this and put a couple of two budgets together. One, if HH does not pass, and that will be the first set of numbers under 238. So the first number here is the net revenue reduction estimate for 238, and then the one on the far right is 303. And then we have the estimate of the assessed value change for 238 and 303. And so many people have asked me, how am I supposed to interpret this? Well, one way is to look at the net revenue reduction estimate. So if HH passes, and we're going to get in more details in a little bit, then you'll be looking at the estimate on the right, but there is a qualification. But this is 100% estimate. So depending on what kind of local government you are, you're either going to get 100%, 90%, or 65%. And we're going to go through what those percentages are, okay, here in a few slides. And then we have the assessed value change of real property, and that's going to help determine what percentage reimbursement you get for this coming year, okay? And we're going to go through those details in a minute. One thing I want to make sure we address, I've been asked this many times, what about URAs and DDAs and their TIFs? So neither bill last year, 238's bill last year, or 303 this year addressed TIF at all. So the URAs and DDAs will not receive reimbursement for their lost revenue due to either of these bills. Now, the only exception to that, there's always an exception to everything, it seems like. The only exception is if a DDA has a mill levy, and I'm not sure, PK, if you guys have a DDA, any DDAs in your county, but
we do have.
Okay, so if they have a mill levy, they're allowed to levy up to 5 mills, that they will get reimbursement because of that 5 mills. They're just treated as any other local government, because essentially they're doing that 5 mills is working through that particular municipality. Okay, so they will receive reimbursement based on that 5 mills, just like any other local government, but they're not going to receive any reimbursement for lost revenue due to the changes for TIF. Okay, so they're going to their revenue is going to be reduced because of the lower assessment rates and the actual value adjustments. So that's it for what's in law today. So we're going to get now, if HH passes in November, which is already next month. So we're only a month away already. And I'm going to talk about the calendar changes. the first calendar change is for the assessor's offices, and the final certification currently in statute requires it to be done by December 10th. We always encourage the assessor's office to get it out as early as possible, obviously, to let local governments work through their process to get their mill levy set. But it's going to move from December 10th to the final date will be December 29th. And it will be there for then using a modified DLG 57 form. And I've got a copy later on in the presentation of what the addendum to the DLG 57 form will look like. And DLG has put that together for us. And so then all you local governments and school board certifications, all those, currently you have to have them into your Board of County Commissioners by December 15th. And that date's going to slide to January 5th. And remember, all this is sliding because 303, or if HH passes, all these assessment rates and actual value adjustments will happen for this year. And that's pretty late in the year. That's happening in November. So they're giving everybody essentially 2 more weeks, with roughly 2 more weeks to be able to get through this and make the changes for 2023. Okay. So local governments and school board certifications will have to be into the county by January 5th if HH passes. And then your Board of County Commissioners will have to certify, fill out their certification of levies and approve all the levies currently in law. It's by December 22nd, but it's going to move to January 12th in 2024. Okay. So again, that's moved out into early next year. Since all that slid out, then the assessor's office, once they get all the finalized mill levies, then they can actually start working on the tax warrant, which is the most important product of the assessor's office. And that date is moving from January 10th to January 19th. All right. So that moved by 9 days. So things are tightening up a little bit from the 2 weeks. So the tax warrant will be out by the 19th, no later than the 19th of January. And then the tax statement, and this is how it's written in the bill, is mailed out as soon as possible after January 19th. I know your treasurer and his staff is going to have a lot of work to do, and it just takes time. Once they get the tax warrant, things got to, I'm familiar with all the treasurer's tasks, but getting it all put together and sent to the printers, and so they can be printed and mailed out, it just takes time. But the bill specifies that it should be done as soon as possible. And so then that's delayed. So delinquent interest is delayed as well then. It does not, and this is verbatim out of the bill, Senate Bill 23303. It does not accrue if payment of the first installment is made after the last day of February, but no later than 15 days after the mailing by the treasurer of the tax statement. And I'll let your treasurer answer questions about that if you guys have questions about it. I'm not familiar with all that, the treasurer stuff. So, all right. So that's the changes in the calendar if HH passes. Everything slides by a couple of weeks. And then we get on to reporting. So each March 1st, if HH passes, each March 1st, starting next year in 2024, and the bill is written as the treasurers will do this. And I should have mentioned earlier, it's the treasurers working in conjunctions with the assessors and all their staffs working together to put all this together, because not any single group of people has all this information. So your treasurers and assessors, all treasurers throughout the state will be working together to produce these work products that need to be delivered. But the bill is written specifically stating that it's the treasurers responsibility, but we understand that the assessors have to do their part as well. PK doesn't get off the hook.
Of course, we are working closely with the Treasurer's Office.
Yes. All right. So they're going to be reporting basically what's the same information that was on the early reporting spreadsheet. So the property tax reductions for each eligible government, but instead of being estimates, they're going to be the actual numbers. And again, for property tax years 23 and 24, that reporting will combine the reductions based on Senate Bill 238 and 303 that happened in 22 and 23. And then going forward from 2025, property tax years 2025 all the way through property tax years 2032, it will be this reporting will be based on just Senate Bill 23303. All right. And that's the property tax reductions. And one thing I'd like to reemphasize is that 2022 property tax year is the base year for all comparison. So even if you're in 2027, those numbers are compared back to 2022. And so everything in Senate Bill 23303 all the comparisons are done back to 2022. Okay. And that's our baseline year. And we're going to be using the 2022 modified mill levy for all calculations going forward, all the way up to 2032. So no matter what your local government sets its mill levy for this year or next year or the following year, the mill levy to be used to calculate reimbursements will be that 2022 modified mill levy. All right. And that's how the bill is written. And then, of course, once we have the revenue reductions, we also need to know the difference in assessed value of real property only. And that's done for each county and eligible local government. And it's always, again, compared with the 2022 property tax year. And then reporting to us as well, we might require additional information because in the bill, it requires the property tax administrator and her staff, obviously, to validate and verify the numbers that each county gives us. And so we're putting a portal together right now. The assessors and treasurers are already familiar with providing us information through a portal at the division, and we're creating another one for just this bill. If HH doesn't pass, they still have to report for 238. So it's not going to be a wasted work product, because it will be used no matter what in this coming end of winter, February, and reporting to us by March 1st. But we're going to have the ability for the treasurer and the assessor to be able to hopefully upload from a file all this data. Okay. And then for property tax year 2023 only, so that's this property tax year, if a local government has a 20% or greater change in assessed value of real property, and again, you can determine that if you look at your early reporting spreadsheet, that's going to give you a pretty good estimate, then your reimbursement is going to be based on the 238 changes only. And so what that does is actually reduce your reimbursement slightly, because those are slightly higher assessment rates, as well as a slightly smaller actual value adjustment, because for real, or at least for real property, again, real property, but actual value adjustment for residential, I should say, not just real. Residential is 15,000 for 238, and 303 it's 50,000. So you can see on the numbers on your spreadsheet, compare what the 100% reimbursement might be for 238 or for 303. Okay. Yeah, that one's a little bit confusing, and we actually missed that our first time through the bill. So backfill. So now we're going to go into the details of what determines what percentage you get. And again, this is for Arapahoe County is a county with a population of greater than 300,000. So for municipalities or special districts, and I've got a PowerPoint right after this one about who's a special district, because I'm sure you're all asking yourselves that question. If you're a municipality or special district, you get 100% if the increase is less than 10% compared to 2022. And this is the increase in assessed value of real property. And so most entities are going to be above that, I suspect. If it's greater than 10%, you're going to get 90% of the increase. So if you're greater than 10%, you take 90% of the what's the 100 of the number that's in your early reporting spreadsheet to give you an estimate. Again, remember, the early reporting spreadsheet is an estimate. And then if the increase is greater than or equal to 20% compared to 2022, we have that caveat that it's going to be based only on the 90% of the 238 changes. So it will not take into account the 303 changes. And then from 24 through 32, if your increase was greater than or equal to 20%, you will get no reimbursement. And then I just put that as emphasis, 0% once an entity is ineligible, okay? And this is only for large counties, which all of our audience is in Arapahoe County. And here are the special districts. If you're a fire district, a health district, a water district, sanitation district, or library district. I'm going to go, so once you did see which one, if you're one of these, I'm going to go back. These are the bill, this is the bill language on determining what your percentage is. 100%, 90%, or 90% of the 238 changes, okay? Now, if you're not a municipality or any of these special districts, such as the county, then if the increase is less than 20% compared to 2022, it's 23 to 32, you're going to get 65%. We're always going to look at what that percent changes each year. Now, if the increase is greater than 20% compared to 2022, in 23, you're going to get a 65% reimbursement based on the changes from 238, and then 0 going forward. Okay. I know it's very confusing and there's lots of iterations and adjustments. So, all right. Eligibility. First of all, I like to emphasize that everybody's going to get some reimbursement this year as long as they have a non-zero modified mill levy. Okay. So what that means is if you were a local government that had no mill levy in 2022 or had a mill levy only of bonds or contractual obligations, then that will be a 0. Your mill levy will be 0, so you will not get any reimbursement. Every other entity will get some reimbursement for property tax year 23. And then starting in 2024, a local government will become ineligible for backfill if the entity ever has an increase of 20% or more in assessed value of real property over 2022. So if you did not have, say if you had an increase in assessed value for 23 of 17%, more likely it's going to be about the same in 24 because it's an intervening year. But in 25, you go over that 20%, you will then become ineligible to receive any reimbursement from the state.
Hey,
Okay.
Tony,
Yes.
we've got a quick question in the chat. If a local government is subject to Tabor such that it might not be allowed to keep all of its property tax revenue, how does this, if at all, affect its backfill?
I've been asked that question before, and my answer is I'm not a Tabor expert, nor am I a lawyer. And so what my advice is to speak to your attorney on the Tabor ramifications of the reimbursement. You can talk to DLG, Division of Local Government, and contact them, and they'll probably give you the same advice. Since DLG just looks at the 5.5%, making sure people follow the 5.5% rule and not the Tabor rule that's in your certification. And so I know that's probably an answer that's sort of wishy-washy, but that's really, I'm not able to answer that question because I'm not a Tabor expert. I'm sorry for that lame answer, but yeah, consult your attorney that you work with on the Tabor ramifications of the reimbursement. Okay. Are any more questions?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right. All right. And then once I've already mentioned this earlier, again, I borrowed these slides from previous presentations, and Arapahoe is a large county. So once it's ineligible, once a local government is ineligible to receive reimbursement, it's ineligible going forward through 2032. There is, of course, another caveat to all this. So if the ineligible entity is a fire district, health district, or ambulance district, this is a little bit different makeup than those 5 special districts. I don't think ambulance district was in that. You will receive a 50% reimbursement every year, no matter what. Okay? And this was an amendment that was added later in the process of when the bill was being pushed through the General Assembly. All right. So if you're a fire district, health district, or ambulance district, you're going to get some reimbursement every year, even if you've had an increase of 20 of assessed value of real property greater than or equal to 20%. Okay. Here are some of the questions we've received in the past from various stakeholder meetings. People have asked me if a metro district has a mill levy, what happens to it, or what happens in general to metro districts. And the answer is if a metro district has a mill levy, it'll be treated as all other local governments. All right. So everybody that has a mill levy is treated the same. If a local district did not levy in 2022, what happens then? They'll not get reimbursement because the reimbursement is based on the 2022 adjusted mill levy. The total adjustments in the spreadsheet are cumulative adjustments for the class and subclass of property. That's a question more for the assessors and treasurers as they were filling out the spreadsheet. I just left it in there. So that helps you interpret what you received from the assessor's office. And then 2022 values should come from what values were used to generate the 2022 tax warrant. We all understand that abatements happen, court decisions happen that make tax roll corrections throughout the year and for years to come. Our interpretation, our recommendation is to use the values that were used to set the 2022 tax warrant. That takes all the up and downs out of the equation, and it's challenging enough as it is. Okay. So in the Senate Bill 23303, there is a new local government revenue limitation. So all of you are in local governments are familiar with your certification form. The top half is the 5.5% data for that limitation. And then the Tabor limitation is the bottom half. And there's going to be a new addendum to that. There's going to be a third limitation. So starting in, if HH passes, DLG has already put the preliminary draft of this in place. You can always reach out to Division of Local Government to get a copy. I've got a copy in my PowerPoint here. That the property tax revenue may increase no more than inflation. All right. And you may temporarily reduce your mill levy. So you can do a temporary mill levy credit in order to lower your mill levy so you don't exceed this limitation, and then be able to raise it at a later date without having to go to a vote of the people. But you also may approve an increase in revenue based on a public meeting and adopt a resolution or ordinance. Okay. And some of the exclusions in this new form are the oil and gas and mining. So the revenue, this is directly out of the bill. And you might hear other people talk about truth in taxation. This is the truth in taxation limitation. That's a term that's used around the country, actually, for this type of restriction, revenue limitation. So this revenue limitation will not apply to property tax revenue from a mill levy that has been approved by voters of the local government without limitation as to rate or amount at any election before, on, or after November 7th, 2023. And this, I put the statute number in there that this was, excuse me, that this was included in. And if you have questions about this, I would ask, this was another one where I'd ask, have you ask your attorney that you work with for your local government to find out in their interpretation, is this limiting you or not? All right, you can call the Division of Local Government as well. I suspect they will ask you to speak to your attorney, because this is this is outside the realm of my expertise. Again, this is outside of property tax law. Okay, and here's go ahead. Was there a question?
We've got one, but I think we can answer it at the end.
Okay, very good. Here is a copy of the addendum for the DLG 57, and it's similar to what's in the 5.5%, but not exactly. And so all the vendors are going to have to, all the assessors and their staff are going to have to figure out how to fill this out for the first time if HH passes. So hopefully everybody, your vendors have seen this. If not, they should be looking at it soon, just to give you a heads up. And then all you local governments will be receiving this, and there's going to be instructions. DLG has put together instructions on how to use this and how to interpret it. The numbers that you get, just like there were for the 5.5% and then the Tabor restrictions. Okay, and DLG is prepared to answer your questions on that. So now we're going to talk about things that are going to be happening starting next year, about the new classifications. There are 3 new classifications coming, 1 next year and 2 in 25. Next year, there's going to be a renewable energy ag land classification. And then in 25, there's going to be a primary residence real property and a qualified senior primary residence real property classification. So the renewable energy ag land, it's going to be an agricultural subclass. It's going to be created next year with an assessment rate of 21.9%. So it's a very favorable assessment rate. And in order to qualify, that land has to have a renewable energy facility of some sort built upon it while being classified as ag. And once that happens, say like a windmill or something like that, then the land will then be valued as ag wasteland, which is a very low dollar per acre. And so the state government is trying to promote use of renewable energy without removing land from ag status. So it still has to be used for agricultural purposes, but it's just used in conjunction. It also will have a renewable energy facility on it. And that's why I talked about windmills, because you can still plow under a windmill, or cows can still graze, et cetera, under a windmill. Solar panels, that's a tougher one because the land underneath it usually can't be used for much. But there might be ways to do it if the solar panels are raised high enough. So, but you know, the people that classify land, if one of these facilities come into play, they'll go out and review it. Okay. The second and third ones are primary residence classifications. So again, this is a residential classification, and an individual owns and occupies. So it has to, and you can only have one primary residence. I know sometimes people try to get a couple primary residences, but only one is allowed, and we'll be reviewing these from a state perspective throughout the state. It's going to be created in 2 years, in 2025, and every primary residence property owner will have to apply. So everyone will have to apply at the assessor's office. How to do that and all that kind of stuff is currently being discussed in meetings that the property tax administrator is having with stakeholders. And starting in 2025, once you apply for that and receive this primary residence classification, you're going to get a $40,000 actual value adjustment going forward from 25 through 32. So it'll lower your actual value by $40,000 before the assessment rate will be applied. Just like this year, there's a $15,000, and if HH passes, there's a $50,000. In 25, it's going to be 40 going forward, but only for primary residence real property. And then there's a qualified senior primary residence real property, and it's essentially the same as a primary residence real property, except that you have to have previously qualified for the senior homestead exemption. So if you've qualified for the senior homestead exemption and you had to move because of whatever reason, therefore you didn't qualify because you haven't satisfied the 10 years, this is basically making the senior exemption portable. Okay, so your current primary residence does not qualify for a senior homestead exemption. So if you moved to downside but lacks the 10 years, you're going to receive an $140,000 actual value adjustment. And so this is essentially making the senior exemption portable. And I know people have talked about that for years and years. How do I make that portable? It doesn't seem to be fair. If once a senior has to downsize, they don't get their reduction. And so the legislature put this together and added this to this bill. Well, now we're here at the assessment rates, and here is a chart of what's going to be happening to the assessment rates throughout the years. You'll see in 23, if HH passes, the residential rate's going to go down to 6.7%. As a reminder, it's currently 6.765, and the adjustment, actual value adjustment, currently is 15,000. So it's going to jump up to 50,000 for this year if HH passes. This is all if HH passes. And then next year, The assessment rate will stay the same. The actual value adjustment will change slightly, go from 50 to 40. And then going forward, 25 to 32, only the primary residence will get the actual value, and multifamily will get actual value adjustments. The one interesting thing here is if you own a multifamily building, you do not have to apply to be considered multifamily. Multifamily is duplex, triplex, or fourplex on up, okay? The other, if it's not a primary residence, is if it's a single family home and it's not a primary residence, they get the 6.7% assessment rate, but they do not get the $40,000 actual value adjustment. And then if nothing changes, which we know things always change, in 2033, the assessment rates will all go back to what they were a couple years ago, which is 7.15%. So all these changes that were made from 238 to this year are all considered temporary changes. For non-residential assessment rates, here is the chart. And the one thing that's interesting to note is that vacant land after this year goes back to 29%. And it stays at 29%. Everything else has a lower assessment rate. All right, that's sort of the unique part about this. And that's probably about all I have to cover, Chris.
Well, we do have a few questions in the chat. Thank you so much for that, Tony, by the way.
Do I need to stop sharing, or would it be helpful if I need to, do I need to go back and look at stuff? I guess it depends on the question.
This is a rather long question, but we'll try and get through it. We've heard concerns that even if a jurisdiction is qualified for backfill under these provisions, there's a statutory limit to the backfill funding amount that is likely to even make it past fire/rescue district in the priority. Is there any sense that A, any non-fire or rescue local government in Arapahoe County would be eligible for reimbursement based on property value increases? And B, is that any amount of money would be available after the prioritization?
I'm not familiar with that. Can you repeat that, man? That was kind of long.
Sure.
See it.
We've heard concerns that even if a jurisdiction is qualified for backfill under these provisions, there's a statutory limit to the backfill funding amount that is unlikely to even make it past the fire rescue districts in the priority.
So I'm not familiar with that statutory limit. I have not heard that before,
Okay.
to be honest with you.
And Eric said he can take that offline too, and he can point you to the specific sections of the legislation. So why don't we get you two connected afterwards and see if we can get an answer there?
Perfect.
And then Dylan had a question that Todd said he could probably answer. Is there agreement on what the inflation rate is to use in the revenue cap calculation?
Yes, I guess there is agreement. When the legislation was first, hi, Todd Weaver, I'm the finance director at the county. I guess I should introduce myself. For all those on the call, my staff is the one you send your certification of levies to, and then we get that input into the system. We pass that on to the assessor and the treasurer for tax roll purposes. But I'm also involved with Prop HH because we're the ones trying to figure out what it means for Arapahoe County. So let me touch on a couple quick topics real quick, including your question, Dylan, about the inflation rate. And let's start with the inflation rate. Yes, there is agreement on what the inflation rate is. If you read the legislation, it essentially says you should use the estimate of the Denver inflation rate for the prior calendar year, so before December 15th of the tax year that you are in. So we are doing 2023 property taxes for 2024 collection. So by the way the legislation is written, the amount that you should use for inflation is the 2022 inflation rate, which is about 8%. So when Treasurer Westerberg in his opening comments said, we at the county have decided that HH really doesn't affect us because we are still Tabor limited, it is because of the distinction between the inflation rate that you would use for your Tabor calculation and that the legislation for HH says that you should use for that calculation. So if you are limited by Tabor, you are using the estimated inflation from the Legislative Council in this fall for 2023 to calculate your Proposition HH inflation participatory tax cap, truth and taxation cap, whatever it's going to be called. You will be using the inflation rate from 2022, which at this point is a final actual number of about 8%. I think it's 8.011% if you look at it in the precise number. So I hope that answers your question. But for us, obviously 8% is greater than 5%. So we're still limited by Tabor as a more restrictive revenue limitation. So for us, HH will not make a significant difference in the revenue that we collect. That said, I know there's a lot of local taxing authorities on this call and possibly folks that represent a number of local taxing authorities. And I'll put out the caveat that, as Tony pointed out in his presentation a number of times, it depends on your specific taxing authority legal circumstances about whether you're limited by 5.5, limited by Tabor, how you apply provisions of Prop HH to your revenue calculation for 2024's revenue. So I guess the overall thing that I've realized with HH studying it so far is that your results may vary based on the circumstances of your district. A couple other things I wanted to hit on really quickly as our role at the finance department fits in with the certification of levies. Couple of the things that I think you should be aware of as a local taxing authority is that you can exceed the Proposition HH tax cap, but it does require certain requirements. Number one, it requires you to have a public meeting with public comment, and the notice for that meeting may be a longer lead time than you're used to with your ordinary public meetings for the budget. So you might want to look into that and prepare for that. In addition, your governing body would have to pass a resolution at that meeting with public comment to exceed the Prop HH cap. So you can exceed that cap. There's a number of steps you have to go through to do that. And that may require a bit more planning, especially since if HH passes, many of the calendar dates, as Tony pointed out, are extended further into January. So I know this is a process that all of us used to wrap up before Christmas. But if Prop HH passes, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. You'll probably be adjusting your mill levy during the holidays since the submission deadline was pushed back to the 5th, which means we have to compile all those 400 mill levies and get them to the Board of County Commissioners for their approval by the 12th of January. And then unfortunately, Treasurer Westerberg has to have the tax roll done a week later. So once again, the calendar is going to shift, not knowing what's going to happen until after the election in November. My advice to all of you would be just to start planning ahead for those public comment meetings, for those resolutions, and for the publication notifying your public of those meetings, understanding that they're a bit different than what you may be used to as part of your normal budget and tax certification process. So sorry, that's a long answer to a very short question, but I wanted to throw a couple other things in there for everybody's education. So
We appreciate that, Todd. Any other questions for Tony or any of the panelists?
Actually, Chris, I wanted to add something real quick on actually question B of Eric's question. Yeah, so the second half of your question, I don't have numbers, but essentially what you're asking is what it sounds like to me is basically, is the money going to run out before they backfill everyone, right? I haven't seen any numbers, but we were on a call with the county commissioners organization last week. They had some legislators on who said based on their projections, there should be plenty. So that's all we got there.
Appreciate
I
that.
also want to comment too, the January 19th is a lovely little gift because that happens to be my birthday. So
Well, happy birthday.
kind of ironic as the treasurer.
And Chris, if I could, I want to jump back to a question that was asked a little bit earlier in the chat from William about if a local government is subject to Tabor, how does this affect its backfill? Notwithstanding what Tony said earlier, if you do receive the backfill, how Tabor treats that receipt of that backfill is a legal question. Being limited by Tabor ourselves at Arapahoe County, we were kind of told, not formally, but informally, for both 238 and 303, that since we're Tabor limited on the front end, that we likely would not be eligible for any backfill period. Because the way our mill levy moves with the limit does not necessarily fit into the calculation for backfill. As I said, I haven't seen that in writing, haven't seen that formally, but from the folks we've talked to, they've kind of indicated that for us at Arapahoe County, backfill is not an option.
Oh, one point to that, Todd, that was the case for those that had floating mill levies that could adjust them up based on the change in assessment rates. But you might want to relook at that since we're going back to the 2022 assessment rates, because you can't adjust that. That's already set in stone. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons I think why they put that in there. But I would ask you to revisit that, because we're going back and not using your 23 mill levy, but the 22 mill levy. Just something.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tony. I mean, it's one of those. I think it's another one of those things that we have to look at and discuss with attorneys and figure out how it fits in. But I said what I heard isn't official. It just kind of was, well, this wasn't really designed with folks with Tabor on the front end in mind, at least HH and 303.
Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, one more for me that I'm curious. I don't even actually know if it's for you, Tony, but I'm curious. I was thinking as you were going through the primary residence real property classification, I know it's coming up for 2025. Is there an organization putting out more regulations, more specific regulations on that? Or is the county going to be able to choose some of those rules? Because let me tell you what I'm thinking. I know people are going to forget to do that, right? They're going to forget to apply for it. I guarantee it. So either one, we have to chase them down, or two, they're going to come to my office when they go to pay it and go, oh, can I apply for that late? So I'm curious if we're going to get regulations or help on that piece.
So in the bill, so there is a working group that property tax administrators put together, and is talking to assessors and elected officials from various sized counties, as well as someone from the real estate world. And they're putting some thought into this and trying to figure out how to do exactly. But what it'll be very closely based on the senior exemption process. There's a form that will need to be filled out, and there's a date in 303. I think it was like March 15th or something like that, April 15th, that everyone had to have it filled out by then. But then it gives the people so if you get it filled out early and it gets denied, you have protest rights. Just like senior exemption. And if you get handed in later, up to July, I think it is, then you've lost your protest rights, but you still can apply. So there's a window, a grace period window. But if you miss that, you have to wait till the next year to do it, to apply for it. But they're working out those details right now in this working group. I don't know. Joanne's put it together, and I don't know who's in it. I'm not part of it because I just heard that they're starting to meet. I haven't been asked to attend, so but they're putting the rules together. But it's going to be done statewide. I don't know if there's going to be any discretion for county by county. I mean, there's always discretion when someone comes into your offices, right? At some point. But we want all the counties to apply the rules equitably and fairly throughout the state. But since it isn't something new, it's good. We've got some time. At least it's not until 25, and so the people are talking about it. I suspect once they've formulated some of the rules around it, they're reporting to the legislature by January 1st of this coming year, and then the legislature will, do with it what they will.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll look for those rules. Appreciate it.
Yeah, actually, for applying a primary residence, we're in talk with the DT for something state. This reporting will go to BT. It is something to structure based for website.
PK, we've got a bad connection with you. Could you repeat that again?
I'm sorry. I was saying that we are working with DPT to put kind of online portal where people can apply for their primary residence. And we prefer if a DPT is making those IT gadget for the website, because ultimately all those reporting will go back to DPT. So it will be very likely it will be available online, and obviously the paper form will be also available. If
Thank you.
Great. We'll make sure we get that added to the website.
Yeah.
What other questions? Anything else? Great. Well, as we've been talking about in the chat, this will automatically show up as a recording if you check back, and I will send it out to folks along with the PowerPoint. I want to thank Tony for his time and expertise this morning, as well as Assessor Kaiser and Treasurer Westerberg and Director Weaver. You guys have been doing great work with us, and we really appreciate all the time you are spending with us to get us caught up to speed on all this. And I'm sure we may have some more questions after the election, so keep them coming to us, and we'll try to get them answered as best we can. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you guys have a great day.
thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.